Hi everyone, it's CricketSong with Inner Wisdom, and today I'm here to do another video. It is a usual dreary, overcast, rainy winter day here in Seattle, and I wanted to make this video with the topic being the answer to a question that I received through a Facebook message. And this individual, who identified themselves as a baby witch, asked if I could explain the purpose of an altar within a witchcraft practice. Because all the books they've been reading and videos they've been watching, a lot of witches talk about their altar. And this individual wanted to know, within the context of witchcraft, what is the purpose of an altar? Specifically, what is the purpose of it? So this video is in response to your question. You know who you are. So when we think about altars, if we really look back at, the historical mentions of altars, they really have to do with a religious or spiritual purpose in relation to deity, God or gods or goddesses. The purpose of the altar, from my perspective, is sort of a meeting place between the worshiper and the god or deity being worshipped. My first introduction to altars was when I was a child. I was brought up and raised in a Roman Catholic household. And my parents took my sister and I to church every Sunday, and then on any holy day like Christmas and Easter and Good Friday and all the holy days in between. In the church, when you walked up to the front, there was the altar. And the only individuals who approached the altar was the priest and the altar boys, and sometimes a Eucharistic minister. But generally it was the priests that addressed God on behalf of the congregation at the altar. And at the altar, the Eucharist and the wine was transformed into the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Prayers were offered at the altar as well. The majority of Mass was said by the priest from behind the altar, facing the congregation when I was growing up. That was not always the way. Previous to that, years before, the priest would face the altar with his back to the congregation. But the altar itself was a place where miracles or the transfiguration or prayers of offering, petition, thanksgiving were given at the altar to God. Now, when you look up the definition of altar, it does say that it is a place, usually a table-like or made of stone, a slab of stone, where sacrifices, offerings, and prayers are given to the gods or goddesses. So for me, when I first started my practice and I identified as Wiccan, I had an altar. I set up an altar because during rituals, when I cast circle and addressed the gods that I was working with and worshiping and communing with and honoring, it was done at the altar. The altar was a place where I placed my tools, where I offered incense and any other offerings to the gods, where I shared, performed the blessing and the consecration of the cakes and ale that I partake and shared with others if they had joined me in circle for ritual. The altar then was a focal point. It was also the anchoring for the circle, for the cast circle, meaning that was the physical location and point where everything all the energy flowed from and was returned to and the altar held any excess energy that was raised during ritual. When I was a member of the coven, the altar was really an important tool for us, because it was, again, that focal point for everyone that gathered. So for me, when I was Wiccan and cast Circle, the altar played a very similar role for me as the altar did when I was growing up and went to church. It was very similar. It was a place we offered offerings to the gods, where we never really performed sacrifices, as you might imagine. We never did that, but we did do other sacrificings, not of live animals, but sacrificing things from ourselves from time to time at the altar. And we did petition, prayer, and again, celebration of ritual was done around the altar. When I left the coven, the altar was still a part of my practice, because I still considered myself Wiccan. I still performed rituals. It was still the anchoring point for me. It gathered energy, it held energy, it received energy that I gave it. And as my practice included honoring my beloved dead, it became a place I not only honored and worked with my gods, it became a place that I honored and worked with my beloved dead and the ancestors of the witches. So it housed items that represented my beloved dead, and it's where I gave offerings to them, where I communed with them. I did many meditations at my altar with a focus on my gods as well as the beloved dead. So it still played that role. It also took on another sort of role, where it became what many of us called a working altar, meaning that I worked my magics and witchcraft at the altar as well. It sort of became a workbench. It housed all the tools that I would use during my magical workings. It would hold my herbs and my incense and my candles and any other tool. It would hold correspondences for my spells. So it took on a workbench role, where just like a carpenter would go to their woodworking bench, I would go to my altar, or my working altar. Now, as my witchcraft has transitioned and I no longer work with a god or goddess or deity in any personified sense, and I worked with the primordial energies of the feminine and the masculine, and I sort of am working with the hag, although I do not perceive as deity, and I still work with my beloved dead and the ancestors and nature spirits. The altar doesn't really have that same role. I don't go there to honor or worship them. There is some representation of the beloved dead on my altar. There is representation of the primordial feminine and masculine at my altar, but I really look at it as a workbench. I may call it an altar, but if we're looking at it being a focal point for working with deity, because I don't work with deity, then I don't really consider it an altar as I might have in the past. It's still a sacred place for me, because it still holds all that energy of all the years that I've been working at that altar. It's still a tool for any excess energies I may raise. It also, I can draw energy from it as it stores the energies from previous rituals and spell workings. It is still a sacred spot and is still an anchor in my sacred space. But I don't pray at the altar. I don't petition the gods. I don't sacrifice things to my beloved dead or the ancestor. I don't do sacrifices. I will do offerings to the beloved dead. But my offerings to the nature spirits are done here in nature. And I don't offer things to the hag, as she doesn't ask for that. So it has changed. So since my perception of my personal altar has changed, my thoughts about the benefits and the purpose of an altar has changed. I will say that I don't believe witches require altars. I think it's beneficial to have a workbench, whether you have an altar or a workbench or just a specific table that you work on. I think there's a benefit to that. Again, from my personal experience, the working with a specific tool like an altar or a workbench or even a specific sacred space, you can reap benefits from that. There is that merging of your energy with that specific tool. So just like there are benefits from a permanent sacred space, you can view my previous video for the benefits of that. It is the same with an altar. So I would encourage you to watch that video to see what I'm talking about in regards to a permanent sacred space. Those are the benefits of having a altar or / workbench. But the purpose of an altar is really the place where humanity or human beings meet deity or the gods and goddesses. But again, that's my thoughts and my perspectives and my experience. You may get different answers from different witches if you ask them, what is the purpose of your altar? Or what is the purpose of an altar for a witch? I do believe there are witches who don't have altars, and I do believe there are witches that do. So if you're watching this and you're a witch that has an altar, or you're a witch that doesn't have an altar, please share that in the comments so that this particular viewer can get different perspectives from different witches. And until next time, I love you. Blessed be.